Okay, we're going to get right into this. So this is kind of a hard topic to talk about because when dealing with human lives, each human, has value and worth. But the increasing number of humans in the earth also has its share of problems. Currently, if we continue at the kind of growth rate which we are at, we will see continual growth throughout the next 100 years. Some estimates have us kind of topping out around 9 or 10 billion, and then flatlining from there. But all of this kind of depends on factors that we can't even predict. We do our best, but there are some things that I'm sure they're going to happen that we just haven't accounted for. Now, what has led to this population explosion? As you see, it looks very similar to our exponential growth rate. About 12,000 years ago was the beginning of agriculture and domestication of animals, which we call the Neolithic Revolution. And this opened up a resource for us where we can now have as much food as we need. So starvation as a cause of death at this point decreased quite a bit. During the Industrial Revolution, we then used machines, thanks to the steam engine, to do most of our work for us. Again, leading to a lot less death and more opportunities for populations to increase. But what has really led to the continuation of human populations increasing has been the medical revolution in the late 1800s, with the discovery of germs, germ theory, things that cause disease, and then with that, the discovery of medicines and vaccines and ways to treat diseases, and sanitary practice has significantly reduced child and adult deaths and has prolonged the lifespan that people live. The Green Revolution in the 1960s, then, with this increase in life expectancy, then coupled with the ability to recognize environmental factors which caused a lot of problems for human populations, we're then able to better handle environmental problems and treat the environment and preserve it. However, we still have a long way to go. The current revolution is, where are we going to go? Is modern technology going to increase our carrying capacity, or is it going to continue to be a black mark on our progress? So these are the 5 revolutions and their approximate dates. And with all these revolutions, we have, again, a growing human population, which seems to be unsustainable. Our best estimate is that the carrying capacity of Earth is at 7.7 billion, but this is very, very hard to calculate. How can you calculate with so many variables around the world? In a few years ago, a scientist kind of accumulated a theory of planetary boundaries when he set out these 9 factors. So rather than just giving us one number, he kind of split it up into these factors, and talked about them as kind of the limits on or that there are limits to the effects of what our human population will do to them and make a sustainable population. So on 3 of them, climate change, biodiversity loss, and nutrient cycles, we seem to have breached the boundary. And we're pushing the boundaries on the other 6, which are ocean acidification, ozone depletion, freshwater use, land system change, aerosol loading, and chemical pollution. And we'll talk about each of these actually when we get into different chapters of the book. the U.S. or sorry, the world does not use resources equally, and the best way to track that is through income. So we have kind of split all the countries of the world into three different categories. The high income countries are make greater than 12,000 a year. These are our developed countries, or also referred to as first world. Middle income, these are generally showing progress towards high income, but haven't been fully developed. And low income, which is less than $1,000 a year. And these are our developing countries, or our third world countries. All right, so Europe and North America, Australia, some countries in the Middle East, and some in the South America are high income countries. Middle income are spread throughout the world. Some big ones are Brazil, India, and China, and they are progressing towards this high income. And then we have these low income countries where it doesn't seem a lot of factors are affecting their development. Another way to track human well-being across many different countries is poverty. So this is kind of a proportional representation of each country and the amount of poverty that they have in each country. So North and South America, generally not a lot of poverty. Brazil has a lot. India and China are very large contributors to human poverty. And most of Africa has significant poverty problems in their population. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit more about what contributes to human population. So fertility rate, or the average number of children a woman contributes to the population over their lifetime, is one way to measure growth. If the fertility rate increases, then you have the population increasing. Anything above 2, right? If it's below 2, then you have population decrease. And if it's at 2 or just over 2, then you're going to have a stable population. So here's a map of the total fertility rates of countries of the world. You can see this, if you put this over the development and poverty maps, you would see a significant correlation with income and fertility, right? So high income countries generally have a lower fertility rate. These low income and developing countries have a higher fertility rate, and some of them are very, very high. And so most of the population increase is occurring in countries which are also not very good at their resource use, or do not have resources available for these people, for this increasing population. So wealth is an interesting thing, because wealthy countries do generally do better at making clean drinking available for all, decrease in disease, and manage their waste and pollution. But they also have a larger environmental footprint, meaning they actually use a lot of resources to take care of these environmental problems. And in fact, the country that has the highest environmental footprint is China currently, but if you did it per person, it would be the United States. The United States has lots of resources. We use them more than any other country per person, and we produce a significant amount of waste. In fact, if everybody lived like Americans, we would need many more Earths to cover all their resource use and deal with all their waste. So the United States leads the world in consumption in 11 of the 20 major commodities, even though we are not the most populous country, including meat consumption, which has a significant environmental effect. Oil production leads the world in sustainable agriculture, pollution control. So there are some positives, but our emissions of carbon dioxide are contributing. We actually don't lead the world anymore. China does, but still per person we do. So affluence allows us to take care of some of our problems, but generally leads to environmental degradation. And who feels that the loss of that is actually other countries? The United States does not. The poor is an increasing problem with these developing countries, right? Poor countries have the increasing populations, have a rural economy, so not as much dependent on city economies. They don't have the technology to manage their waste, and they have much less education, so an inability to be able to get out of poverty. And they usually have very few people that are controlling most of the wealth and power, and that oftentimes that leads to corruption and unequal share of resources. So there is a equation here to measure environmental impact, which is a product of the population, affluence, and consumption, right? Which is the P. And the consumption patterns is the A, and then technology, your ability to deal with those. And you could also divide this equation by stewardship. How well does the population manage their resource control? So if you thought about this, a wealthy country has a population that isn't growing, has the consumption patterns that are high, but also a lot of technology to deal with those consumption problems. And then the stewardship, the mindset of the people, and the policies is dependent on the country. It's different from country to country. All right. So again, I told you that there are different growth rate predictions for the world population. This medium prediction here is probably the most accurate, where somewhere around 9 to 10 billion is where we'll level off for the most part. All right, so we have birth rate, which affects our population. The number of births per 1,000 people is the crude birth rate. Fertility rate we talked about before, and the death rate. And then we can have a crude death rate, number of deaths per 1,000 people. You also have people that come in from other countries or leave to other countries. So to get to zero growth, basically all these things have to be in balance. Your birth and death rate and your immigration. And immigration, maybe you could have a low birth rate, which happens in some countries, but still have lots of immigrants to make up for that. So one of the ways in which we graphically display a population is called these population profiles, which splits the population into different age groups and shows how many of that population are in each age group. And when you graphically display it, it gives you a good idea of how the population is changing. So this is Sweden by age group, and you can see there's there's this baby boomer generation, and then you have this decrease in population. And now at the bottom you have an increase, and this is probably, well, let's see, this was in 1950, okay. Over time, so flash forward to 2010, and it does seem to have kind of a stable population for all age groups. And the prediction is that it will kind of continue on this route. Generally, developing countries have a decreasing elderly population, and developed countries have a kind of a top-heavy graph. Let's see. So one of the reasons which contributes to these differences is called the demographic transition. So in phase 1, there is a high birth rate offset by a high death rate. Okay, so this is kind of how we used to live before the sanitary practices, which reduced the death rate. So in phase 2, the death rate declines, so people are living longer, but the birth rate stays high. And so at this point, you have a population increase. And in phase 3, the birth rate declines due to a more educated and affluent public. And then the last phase is where you have modern stability achieved by matching that birth rate and death rate. So developing countries are generally in this phase 4, or developed countries. Developing are in 2 and 3. Poor countries are generally in this 1 or 2. Okay, so this is the graphical representation. Primitive stability, high death and birth rate. The death rate reduces drastically, and that follows by which is called the epidemiological transition, and that is followed by a decrease in the birth rate called the fertility transition, and then when both are low you have a modern stability phase. So some developing countries are stuck in that second phase where they have a low death rate and a high birth rate, and others are transitioning into this developed country stage, South Korea and Brazil. So some solutions to get out of them are first economic growth, slowing down the population growth, education and other things help as well. So the International Conference on Population Growth and Development determined that the one factor which had the greatest effect on this transition is women's rights and education. If women are educated and get the health care and employment they need, they're able to take care of themselves, and usually they do much less. That increases the birth rate. So development in and of itself must be linked to a reduction in poverty if it's going to increase the well-being of a country. And existing poverty should not be tolerated. This is not something we want to just turn a blind eye to. And so there are many efforts throughout the world to decrease poverty. Because poverty is also a worldwide problem, it is a threat to the environment and sustainable practices. So an interesting thing to look at is, why do developing countries still have these large families, especially if they're strained for environmental goods and services? Some of the reasons include, in old age, if you have lots of children, they can take care of you. Infant and child mortality has decreased. These helping hands kind of along with the first one. If you're a rural society, a rural economy that's agriculturally minded, then you want lots of hands to take care of the responsibilities. The status of women is usually very low, and so their ability to decide when to not have children is compromised by their rights. And the availability of contraceptions. So this creates this poverty cycle, where you're in poverty, you overuse resources, that degrades the environment, so more hands are needed in order to work the environment, and women being in without rights will also, and these other ones will cause high fertility, and this causes less resources among more people, so continues in this poverty cycle. Alright, there has been some progress. Fertility rates are decreasing on average. Less people are in poverty than they used to be. Technologies are spreading and being used for clean water and control of diseases. Education is growing, but there's still a lot of people in poverty. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done. So in the turn of the century, these millennial development goals were set. Some of them were which affect our population: reduce child mortality, promote gender equality and empower women, improve maternal health, and eradicate extreme poverty and hunger. How well did we do on these? Well, we have a lot of different international agencies to help, including United Nations, the Millennium Development Goals, the World Bank, which offers loans to get people out of this poverty cycle, but it doesn't always achieve its goals, and sometimes has to change their strategies to match existing conditions. So some of the problems which affected this include the debt crisis. So we're kind of coming out of that, but there are some long-lasting effects because in order to pay these debts that countries got themselves into, they're doing unsustainable practices, such as growing cash crops instead of food crops, adopting austerity measures, and exploiting the natural resources. There's also been a decrease in donation from developed countries to developing countries. And donated food is cheaper than local food, which also creates a strain on the economy because then people aren't buying the food that people are growing. So there are some unintended consequences to even aiding poverty-stricken countries. All right, so there has been some success in some areas, improving education, especially in women. This is, in my opinion, bottom line, what needs to be done to help developing countries. Empowering women is going to increase the society's whole ability to manage the resources. Improving health, especially in infant mortality and disease, making family planning accessible, enhancing income through employment opportunities, improving resource management. These are all connected through our globalization of our markets and of our food and of our economies. So this shows the number of mortalities and the percentage of them in different countries. So in developed countries, cardiovascular diseases are the number one killer. Cancers, those combine for quite a bit of the deaths. Communicable diseases are very, very low. So we're able to monitor the health of diseases and treat them. In developing countries, however, though, communicable diseases are the number one cause of death. Cardiovascular diseases are a problem as well. All right, so again, another program which has had significant success in helping people come out of poverty has been micro-lending. The Mormon Church also is involved in this with the Perpetual Education Fund. But Muhammad Yunus in Bangladesh started this. He lent over 6.6 billion in 35 years. And this is usually done through groups of people called credit associations. So a group of people, and usually women, is what has been the most successful, are given a sum of money which they have to pay back. And so this sum of money may be used to help them buy equipment for business or tools or something which will contribute to their ability to have a job and increase their earning potential. It's not just a loan given for no reason. When done in a small group, it allows each of these people in the group to monitor each other. So there isn't a lot, and because it's a small loan, there isn't a lot of collection that needs to be done. It's generally self-sufficient when you do it in these small groups. And this has really helped then a lot of very poor people develop their way out of poverty and contribute to their economies. All right, that's